Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to my weekly email newsletter, Friday Focus. Each Friday, I focus on one topic with one action arising. The link to sign up is in the show notes, or head over to amyrowlandson.com and sign up right now. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Ben Wales. Ben, welcome.
Hi, Amy.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm a little bit nervous to be here.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, as you know, because you're a coach as well, we spend a lot of our time, don't we? It's kind of our job to be aware of our clients' why and sometimes to surface it or bring it up to date. But this turns the tables. This is about my why, and that's not happened for a little while. So I'm a bit nervous. Go
Oh,
easy on me.
well, you know then as a coach that you already have the answers within, right?
Oh, good answer.
So from that basis, it's just who you are. It's just what you do. It's there. There's nothing to sort of feel nervous about. What is it you're doing at the moment, Ben?
Three things, I suppose, or the way I think of it is three things. I'm growing my coaching practice, which is a B Corp called Leader and Team. I'm growing my family, not in the sense that I'm adding to it in any way, but they're all growing up, and that's the most important part of my job, I suppose. And growing myself.
Yeah. Well, all incredible. Focused around growth.
Mhm.
What does growth mean to you?
What does growth mean? Oh, there you go with the good coach questions right away, straight off the bat, Amy. I'm I'm a maximizer in my Clifton strengths. I'm a maximizer. I'm futuristic. So I'm forever imagining what's possible, um, and then how that could happen and how full that possibility could be, and then how to move towards it. As soon as I've imagined what's possible for myself, for my family, the kids, or for a client, and we've got a good description of that, then I'm kind of eager for the present to catch up to that future. And for me, that process is growth.
Knowing that you're both a maximizer and a futurist and wanting to maximize the most out of the present and also being pulled into the future, is there ever any conflict between those two strengths?
No, I think for me, it's a really useful frame. If there's something in the present that is not how I want it or is frustrating me, or then I've got an easy way to move forward. I know where I'd like that to shift to, and I know that the future will soon be here. So actually, I think it really helps me in the present if something's off, and if the present is good, then I'm quite happy to pause my my drive to get into the future and appreciate what's here and now.
Now, you mentioned the Clifton strengths, and they give you your top 10, and well, they give you all of them. Obviously, there's like 34 of them, but order them and separate the top 10. What else featured in your top 5? I'm just curious there.
So my top 5 are strategic, activator, maximizer, futuristic, the two we've spoken about, and individualization.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. And how does knowing your strengths in your business, your family and your sort of personal growth all come together?
I guess it's relatively recently that I went through the strengths process with a brilliant strengths coach called Hannah Miller, who would be a wonderful guest here one day. And so it was relatively recent, and it was quite confirmatory in the sense that I could see, okay, now that makes sense. I can see how I was successful in at certain points, both professionally and personally, and just that extra bit of clarity about how I was being successful uh, enabled me to sort of lean further in to taking that approach. And it also got me thinking about um, you know, it's called Clifton Strengths, and it's easy to think that there would be weaknesses, but there's not really. There's different approaches, and other people approach things in different ways, and that wouldn't be my approach. But it's not, I don't think of that as a weakness for myself. Just it makes me aware that I've got an alternative approach that works well for me and might work well for people that I'm talking to.
And it's interesting because I mean, the whole origination of Clifton Strengths was based on the work of Don Clifton, who said, what would happen if instead of studying what was wrong with us, we focused on what was great? And it's literally about education, and it was echoed in sort of Sir Ken Robinson's work about schools killing creativity in his TED talk that we can talk about. It's so interesting that there is that tendency to look at the weaknesses that we have instead of really leveraging our strengths. And it's so key to activating your purpose, to know what your core skills are in what you can really bring to the table.
I love Ken Robinson, by the way, and his concept, the elements, being in one's element, the point where your personal passions and natural talents come together. And he talks about sort of the child that's bored in class, the disillusioned employee, those moments when we feel frustrated and we don't know the reason why. And in all of those cases, it's very people, for the by and large, they're good and they're motivated. It's just that there's a situation where they're unable to play to their strengths quite often.
So what is it that you've taken from what you've learned recently in the Clifton Strengths, also what you know about the element?
The element I found really useful because one of the other things that Ken Robinson talks about is the book called The Element, or did he? It is, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I think it's Finding the Element.
Finding the Element. That might
behind me on the bookshelf, but something like that.
Yeah, he describes finding your element as a quest. We don't quite know how to get there, but we will know once we've arrived. And along the way, it's a process of trying things, noticing things, learning things, and and retaining those pieces that are part of the answer, part of our element. And so I've definitely taken that sense of quest from the element, and I enjoy that. That's it's something that keeps me curious all the time. It's one of the reasons why I say I'm always growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Purpose, you mentioned right at the beginning that you're growing your coaching business leader and team, which is a B
Yeah.
Corp. Tell us more about what that means.
Well, let me back up a tiny little bit. Because when I thought about your question, or the name of this podcast, Focus on Why, I struggled a tiny bit with why. And then I thought, actually, It's because I need to think about two things. One of them is purpose, the other is passion. And for me, I started with passion. If we go back 5, 6, maybe even 6, 7 years now, to when uh, I left my corporate role. I'd been managing director of uh, a CIO advisory um, consultancy, um, and we might explore the story of that a little bit later. But I'd left. I call it my great escape because it was quite a big uh, transition. I was pretty burned out at that point as well, properly burned out, in fact, and uh, I had the time to think about what am I going to do next. And around about this time, I had started a short piece of executive education, as they call it, at Henley Business School, a short course in coaching. And this was just to bring coaching into my management and leadership style, because, that's a good thing to do, right? That was the original motivation. But I found, first of all, that it fascinated me as I began to understand the psychology, the positive psychology behind coaching, as I began to understand more about uh, individuals. I found it fascinating. It's completely different to my first degree, which was aeronautics and astronautics engineering, a world apart. I was fascinated. And then, of course, I was having coaching conversations, and it was a wholly new experience for me because those conversations had a big impact on the people I was coaching, the people I was having the conversations with, and I'd found my passion. Yeah, and I think of it as, this will make sense given what we said earlier. I think of it as, exploring what's possible through deep, transformative conversations, coaching, and pretty quickly people came back and said, "Ben, can we have another conversation, please? Can we continue this conversation?" I was absolutely in a state of flow during these conversations. So I'd found my passion. Let's call it coaching. And then it was really important. And by the way, the short piece of executive education became a master's degree in the psychology of coaching and behavior change. I was a bit insatiable, couldn't get enough of it. I began to build my coaching practice, which originally was called Proponents. Leader and team came a little bit later, but purpose became important. And it was around noticing when these conversations were the most powerful. And that's when I work with the founders, leaders, and teams that are growing scale up companies, scale up and scale out companies. For me, they've got the toughest task in business because this is a small team normally, often doing it for the first time, and they have to operate the company. So performance, that's a full-time job. They have to imagine the future. It's hard to step back, scan the horizon, figure out what the future could look like and what we'd like it to look like. They have to do that as well. And then they have to make the future happen, transformation. So, that's 3 big tasks, which in a large organization would probably be done by multiple teams, not just one team. So, I noticed this and I thought I'm at my most effective when I'm working with the founders, leaders, and teams that grow, scale up, scale out companies. And I'm at my most effective when I work with the combination. If I work just with the founder or CEO, we would do great stuff. At some point, we'd hit a limit, and that limit quite often was the capacity of the team. Or I'd work with an individual leader in their organization, maybe somebody who's transitioning into leadership, or somebody during a particularly demanding period. They would do great things, and at some point they'd come back and and it hadn't worked out between our last conversation and the next conversation, and they'd walked into the dynamic of the team, and the team dynamic is very often stronger than the individual. So I realized actually I need to be able to work with individual leaders, but I also need to be able to influence that team. And if I'm working with a company over a period of time, as it goes through, a doubling or trebling in size, as it does its scaling up, I'm going to need to be able to work with different combinations of leader and team. And this is when I was at my most effective, and that became my purpose, helping to shift leaders and teams from high performance to high transformation, so that they could scale up their business. And you mentioned B Corp earlier. So the other way I think about this is, I'm helping to grow the leaders and teams that grow the companies that grow opportunities in our communities. And this is where the purpose is. So, in combination with passion, this tells me when and where and with whom I should be having coaching conversations, and how also.
And there's all the growth again. It comes right back into the heart of your work. There's been a lot of talk, Ben, about how you've found various elements here. And obviously going back into the whole Ken Robinson's finding your element. Do you believe that you find your purpose and you find your why?
Yes, I think so. It's definitely a quest. It takes a while. Having found it, though, there's further to go. We can know our why better and better with each passing experience or each passing month, year. And I'm quite open to the idea as well that that purpose and passion might change, and for lots of people it does change. And we've got to consider that there's going to be mission accomplished moments when it's time to say, that purpose has been met now. Time for something new, maybe time for something completely different. And again, it's a quest.
I agree. And the reason I say, do you believe in the finding element, finding as being the verb, is I feel it can be misleading in terms of people feel that they can find this externally. And I think that's the difference, is that it's not something that you literally find. It's something that you create and you feel, but from within. And so that's the sort of the confusion that I see a lot with people who talk about finding their why.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's likely a reason that I prefer to think about purpose and passion rather than why. Why is there's not quite enough to it for me.
Well, yeah, but I guess, again, this is where we all have these different definitions, and it is, again, of course, very subjective. And I see the whole reason why I've got focus on why as the core of the name for the podcast is because I see purpose as the overarching intention that guide the direction of your life. And the why is the emotional significance that you attach to the purpose. So it's where the why is the meaning. in terms of which comes from reflection. So every time you have an experience, you experience it and then you attach meaning to it. And purpose is seen through the action you then take subsequently as a result of that. So it's through the process I call reflection with action that your why and your purpose come together. So they are interconnected, but they are different and they're separate elements. But I do think that there is this very different perspective that some people adopt to the different words. And again, just as I've got my own perspective, and there's no right and there's no wrong here, but there can be confusion.
So you're teasing out their meaning, which I haven't really spoken about. And this is why my coaching practice is a B Corporation. And a B Corporation, there's more and more of them, but many people still are discovering B Corporations for the first time. B Corporations operate with more than just the profit motive. They have a triple bottom line. So they consider people, planet, and profit in every decision. And that's really important to me. The most satisfying moments are when someone I'm working with becomes more. When they say, "Wow, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know I wanted to do that. I found something," and they have more impact, but also life has better impact for them personally. Or if it's a team, the amount of good that comes from a team shifting from high performance to high transformation and taking their business forward. I always work with values-driven businesses and leaders. So as a team shifts from high performance to high transformation and multiplies the impact of that business on its customers, on everybody that works there, on their families, on the community, that's huge. That's worth doing. So this for me is the meaning. And if I can be a small part of that, I'm really happy.
So that is, for me, the emotional significance that you have created. Again, it's not something you found, you've created that because it's the interpretation of what you've seen and how you can then put it into action that your purpose is then delivering. So that's how, for me, you've just articulated your why and your purpose. I love that. And companies that lead authentically with purpose are literally not just changing the nature of how business is conducted and perceived by their various components, their consumers, their teams within as well, but they're responsible for changing nature itself.
I completely agree. And one of the brilliant things that's happening right now is I think there's been a shift. A few years back, it was more common to find a company, a team that had these values that worked in these ways when those teams and companies would be independent. But today, more and more portfolio companies with private equity portfolio companies, companies that are investor backed in one way or another, they also have these values, and investors are looking for it. So I think that's a really positive sign for the future.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I mean, quite frankly, I can't see any other alternative because, people need a planet to live on. And if it's not at the core of business, which has the power to affect the way that the planet is being looked after and taking responsibility for that, then, we won't have a place to perform business.
Yeah, it's essential, isn't it? Are you optimistic for the future?
I am. I am, because of the children of the future
Mhm.
are seeing the work that's being done now. And as you just said, you led this conversation with the fact that you've got your business, which is a B Corp. You are focused on personal development, but you said the most important part was the growing up of your family and
Mhm.
how your role within that is. So, yes, you're doing the work now, but you're also focused on how that's being translated in your
Mhm.
everyday moments as well.
Mhm. Yeah,
And I'm the
exactly.
same. I've got, two children, the grown up children, they're at university, and helping them to recognize that there was a moment yesterday, and I shared with you that my daughter ran a marathon which she didn't complete.
Mhm.
And my interpretation of that was that it wasn't the lesson that she needed at that time to complete the marathon. She needed to understand that it was more about collaboration, gratitude, and love, and
Yeah.
what happened as a result of her not completing it, than it was for her to see the value of competition. And yes, she'd trained really hard, and absolutely, but the conditions of the environment were not conducive to her performing that day. What she then found was a different result. And it's for her to interpret her own meaning. I take it that I see what happened in my way. But
Mhm.
again, often these obstacles or the challenges we face teach us so much more about humanity and understanding purpose, and interpreting meaning in those moments is critical.
Yeah, I learn so much as my kids grow up and they have different experiences and you know and approach take their own approach, um, and you know an outcome unfolds, and I think you know part of the learning for me is realizing they've approached that in a different way than I would, different way than I might today, a wholly different way than I would have done at their age. Um, and I realize a lot about myself, from noticing that. And I think when when it's someone that you know and love as much as um, one of your children, that's such a rich process.
It is a rich process. And you mentioned earlier about your great escape
Mm,
and the big transition
mm,
that you experienced, and also the recognition that you were in a state of burnout.
mhm.
I don't know the timeline because I don't know how old your children are, but you mentioned that was 7 years ago. Did that correlate with the starting or the different period in your own having the family as well?
We might have to ask them at dinner tonight. Um, yeah, I think it must it must have done. There's definitely a real rebalancing, partly because that had been a really demanding role, and so took too much time, if you like. The balance, the combination, um, wasn't quite right. But I think far more significant is, um, back then I wasn't working close enough to my passion, and my purpose. Yeah, and that takes a toll. And another way that I've learned about this. Have you come across Gay Hendricks and his concept of zones of incompetence, competence, excellence, and brilliance?
Yeah, it's in the Big Leap.
The Big
Is that,
Leap. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. It's quite a tough book to listen to. I tend to listen to books rather than read them. It's super American in the way it's put together. So it's quite tough to listen to. Lots of people here in the UK don't get too far, but it's worth sticking with it for that concept. And back then in that professional career, I was working in my zone of competence, my zone of excellence, and there were clues to. Does he call it zone of brilliance or zone of genius? Zone of genius.
Genius.
Yeah, there were clues to my zone of genius, but I wasn't working in my zone of genius. And I know actually that was super visible. I remember really clearly. Um, I think it was Elliot, the middle one, would have been 5 or 6, maybe. And I got home from work one day. I can see this. So we were in the hallway just inside the front door, and I put my stuff down. And I think Elliot was showing me something from his day, and it still stops me dead in my tracks. I've just paused, haven't I, while talking. I remember Elliot looking at me and saying, "Daddy, you've got your work face on." And I mean, he was so spot on. I had been still thinking about whatever it was. Yeah, and it was so eloquent of him. I've never remembered, never forgotten, always remember. And yeah, so I think that's the answer to your question. It absolutely will have been the beginning of a whole new chapter in our family.
Yeah. And honestly, as you describing that, I didn't even need to know what was going to be said or what he said, because I literally got the prickles and in my eyes, and sort of just knowing that, having experienced that myself, and just knowing that they are the greatest teachers because they show you what really matters. And in that moment, it is a realization that your gift of your presence, which he couldn't see because you had a different mask on at that time, was you weren't there for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
super, super grounding. And thinking about it now, um, yeah, because part of that story is I was working so hard, putting so much effort in. Um, yeah, and I succeeded. I was okay. I was good as a managing director, and we made good progress. But I was putting so much effort in. Fast forward to today, and I still work hard. I work really hard, but it doesn't feel hard in the same way. And my impact feels like it's, 10 times, 100 times sometimes, by working in my passion, on my purpose, um, I have so much more impact.
And it's interesting you say that you were working so hard and with all this effort before, and that now it feels effortless, not not without effort, of course, but it feels effortless. There's a distinction there. It was still to provide for your family. It was still the same aim, was still the same, that you wanted to give everything, but it didn't require giving your all in terms of what you then didn't have left for them at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And, thinking of Gay Hendricks zones, I hadn't found my zone of genius. My zone of competence in there might be sales. The zone of competence is tasks we can do adequately. I'm adequate at selling, and I'm even quite good at it. It can be a trap because you can build a career, can't you, around selling. It's a rare skill, but it was just a zone of competence for me. So I wasn't fantastic about it, and it took a lot of effort. It was quite draining. Zone of excellence, all the complexity that comes with leading a company, a team. I was pretty good at that, and we did okay. But the zone of genius, so zone of excellence tasks we do extremely well. Zone of genius, those unique abilities that we're passionately skilled at. That was much more to do with how I could bring a team together, how I could enable a team to surprise itself, surprise everyone, to become more than the sum of its parts. And I hadn't quite got that bit figured out. In fact, it was a really inconvenient truth, Amy, and it puzzled me for a little while. The company had grown. We were acquired a couple of times. Both times that we were acquired, what I expected to happen was that our growth would flatten out, our performance would flatten out, maybe drop a bit. I would churn a few of my people, we would lose a few people. Same with our customers, and I'd probably lose a couple of really key people and key customers. That's what I was ready for. It would take a few weeks, a few months to restart the growth. Both times, that's not what happened. Both times, my entire team stayed intact, and we immediately had the best quarter we'd ever had by every single metric. Engagement was up. We would win new customers, aspirational customers. The work would be more strategic. The team would achieve firsts in all sorts of ways. And I couldn't explain it. So first of all, it was a nice puzzle. The team pulled together so powerfully in a moment that really counted and surprised me. And then it became a super inconvenient truth, because I realized, so my team, who are a really good team, and I would have told you at the time they were a great team. I would have called them a high performance team, actually. They had this additional potential, which appeared in those two moments. And when I realized, so that potential was there, and I had failed to release that, what if I had made that potential the norm, their everyday standard? What if I'd helped them to do that? And so this was a super inconvenient truth. We talked about my strengths earlier. Knowing that I had left that potential on the table, apart from those two moments, I had to go figure that out. And that's now why leader and team and that shift in teams, so that they can really become best in class, world class, deliver their full potential for the benefit of themselves, their customers, everyone in the company, communities. Makes me smile.
Yeah. And it is that knowing and discerning a difference between the inconvenient truths, as you call them, often uncomfortable, and understanding that you could challenge them, do something about them, or you can just accommodate this sort of inconvenient truth as a comfortable lie. Essentially, you could just go with what's easier, whatever the easier route is, or you can do something about it.
Yeah, it's that possibility of accommodating the inconvenient truth as a kind of a comfortable lie, choosing to go with that because it would have been successful. Do you know what? I've never even thought of that. That's so opposite of of the way I think about things, but you're right.
Sometimes you don't see what's going on. You're so far in the picture that you need to step out, and you stepped out.
Yeah, and I stopped working in my zone of competence and my zone of excellence, and and then the genius part appeared.
Yeah, you challenge the status quo, and then the rest is aligned because of understanding. And as you said, you only work with companies that are values driven. and not just ones that say they are, but actually are. The big difference. Again, I'm fascinated that you mentioned that you took yourself into this insatiable learning growth, and you took a master's degree in psychology and behavior change.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say ask you how that is now applied in your world, because it's clear, it's evident. This whole conversation is evident. But what would you say has been the greatest transition for you from your understanding and shift from a previous life of aeronautical and engineering and sales to where you are now?
Mhm. Well, the thing that's popped into my mind, so I'll go with that. So the thing that's popped into my mind is one of the early things uh, I learned on that master's course is the idea that a person's actions um, make perfect sense to them given their lived experience. And I found that such a grounding experience, because frequently we don't agree with, maybe don't approve of the actions that someone's taken and don't make sense to us. But once I realized that to that person, um, those behaviors, those actions, they make perfect sense. It gets me curious. I'm wondering, well, okay, so, what have they lived through that means this is the right course of action for them? And it's such a useful pause to take, and I think um, is it's an unconscious concept for me now, but it's definitely right there uh, in the heart of all of my coaching with individuals and with teams. And of course, it comes back to what's driving us, what's our motivations, and as that can come into awareness, everything changes.
And it links straight back to, again, where we started, the maximizer, the futurist, because it comes back into what becomes possible when people are exposed to more lived experience, what becomes possible when their behaviors, actions, and their possibilities come together to create what it is that is possible for people, planet, and essentially profit.
Yeah, and what's possible is one of my favorite questions, and what else is possible is another favorite question.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to, again, your strategic, your activator, your individualization. All those strengths are at the core of who you are. Ben, we could talk for hours about purpose, passion, people, profit, everything, and planet, of course. What's the best way for people to reach out? I'll put it in the show notes, but just share with us now.
Three ways. Connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a direct message there, or on my LinkedIn profile at the top, there's a link to book a call. I think we'll set up. It's a Calendarly link, so we'll set up a half-hour exploratory call. So that's another option, or simply email me at Ben, BEN, at leaderandteam, all one word, .com.
Perfect. Well, they'll all go in the show notes, and thank you. Ben, what a wonderful conversation we've had today. It really has been enlightening and informative and uplifting. And I'm hoping that it will help someone to understand where they are now, that there is a possibility and there is a huge amount of potential for taking what they've got to what they want and bridging that gap. I feel this conversation has certainly helped in some way. That's, as a coach, that's what we both aim to achieve. Tell me, what would your final words be?
I'm going to pick, because we were just talking about questions, weren't we? And there's three good questions, and we're not going to have time to explore them at all. And I think that's perfect because they're good questions to think about. So these are questions from Dr. Aki Hintsa, he's passed sadly, but he was a physician, and he's done a lot of work in Formula One. So he's worked with Hakkinen, Raikkonen, Vettel, and he's got a brilliant book called The Core, well worth a read. And he asks three questions. He asked three questions of each of those world champions. And I'm not sure these were the questions I expected, but they're great questions. So his questions are, do you know who you are? Do you know what you want? And are you in control of your own life? And the combination of answers to these three questions are what Aki Hintsa describes as the core. And I think it's so close to what we've been talking about today. So that's where I'd love to leave it, for people to think about. Do you know who you are? Do you know what you want? And are you in control of your own life?
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.